When a deep woman leaves, she doesn't slam doors or throw accusations. She simply folds into silence. And in that silence is the first thing men regret, the absence of her emotional depth. At first, he doesn't realize it. Life goes on. Days blur, distractions keep him busy. But slowly, a strange quiet seeps into his world. Not the kind of silence that's peaceful, but the kind that lingers in the chest. Like a room once filled with soft music, now echoing with emptiness. A deep woman speaks with more than just words. Her gaze carries volumes. Her presence soaks into the walls of a home, into the habits of a man. When she walks away, her absence doesn't just leave a gap, leaves a haunting. Carl Jung spoke often of the anima, the feminine soul within every man. When she leaves, he's forced to face the aching space where her spirit once danced with his. He begins to recall her differently. Not in the moments where they laughed or touched, but in those quiet times when she understood without him saying a word. He remembers the depth of her questions, not the ones she asked aloud, but the ones she made him ask himself. Who are you when you're not pretending? What are you afraid to confront? Her presence had a way of unmasking him, not through confrontation, but through stillness. She was not a mirror. She was a doorway. Now, without her, that doorway is closed, and he feels it like a phantom limb, something essential that used to be there, guiding him, grounding him, mysteriously pulling him into his own soul. The second regret creeps in more painfully. He regrets not protecting the sanctuary she created. A deep woman doesn't give her heart to be played with. She gives it to build something sacred: trust, connection, meaning. Men often realize too late that she was not simply emotional or too intense. She was tuned to a higher frequency, one that required courage to stay connected with. He thought he could play distant, flirt with detachment, hide behind ego or apathy. But what he didn't see is that her love was a kind of ecosystem. It thrived on honesty, intentionality, presence. And when those things are absent, she begins to withdraw, out of punishment, but out of preservation. By the time he noticed her fading, it was already too late. And now, the very air feels different without her aliveness breathing into it. She didn't leave to be cruel. She left because he didn't notice her unraveling. He didn't see that every quiet night spent turning her face to the wall was her way of saying, "I'm slipping away." And the tragedy, he thought she would always stay, because she had stayed through so much. But deep women don't leave loudly. They leave emotionally, long before their body walks out the door. Now, he regrets every moment he dismissed her intuition. Every time he called her too sensitive. Every time she tried to explain how tired her soul was. He wishes he had just listened. Not with his ears, but with his presence. Jung believed that what we don't make conscious will return to us as fate, and for him, the loss of her becomes that fate. A mirror of all he neglected within himself. In the days and months that follow, something shifts. He looks at other women and notices they don't move like she did. They don't feel like her. They may be beautiful, clever, even nurturing, but none of them carry the same mystery, because she was a mystery, not a puzzle to solve, but a poem to experience. And now he regrets the most human thing of all, not cherishing the gift while he still had it. He thought he had time. But a deep woman doesn't stay where she isn't seen. She leaves not to hurt, but to heal. And as she walks into her own horizon, silent and steady, she becomes the one truth he can never unsee. The magnetic ache he'll carry quietly for the rest of his life. Asterisk, there comes a strange moment, sometime. After she's gone, when he realizes what she really was to him, not just a lover or a companion, but a mirror. That's the third regret. Rejecting the mirror she held up to him. A deep woman doesn't reflect a man's ego, she reflects his soul. And the thing about seeing your soul is, it's never comfortable. She mirrored his hidden fears, his unhealed wounds, his dreams still buried beneath distractions and denial. He thought she was too much because she demanded depth. But it wasn't her demands, it was her essence that stirred discomfort. Her love was not lighthearted, it was soul work. And instead of rising to meet her, he shut down. Now he's left with shallow echoes of who he was in her presence, and the haunting knowledge that she saw more in him than he allowed himself to become. Jung often spoke of the shadow, that repressed, unacknowledged part of us we feared to look. And that was the part she saw and loved in him, not the version he performed for the world, but the broken boy behind the pride, the tired man behind the humor, the fearful heart behind the strength. She loved him in the raw, and now he regrets that he wore masks even with her. The fourth regret starts to sting deeply now. He regrets not being vulnerable when it mattered. He remembers the nights she asked, "What are you really feeling?" And he brushed it off, half laughed, or turned away. He told himself he was strong for not crying, powerful for not admitting weakness. But now he sees her questions weren't interrogations. They were invitations. Invitations to be human, and he declined them. What he once viewed as intensity, he now understands as rarity. She wasn't asking for too much, she was offering more than most could ever hold. That emotional availability, that spiritual hunger, that piercing intuition wasn't a burden, it was a gift. She wasn't trying to fix him, she was trying to connect. Not with the armor, but with the man beneath it. Now that she's gone, the irony reveals itself. He finally understands her, but he can no longer reach her. He begins to regret every moment he kept things surface level, every time he changed the subject when the conversation got too real. He realizes that emotional safety wasn't something she demanded, it was something she gave, and he didn't. Protect that sacred space. It starts showing up in strange places. He hears a song she once hummed under her breath. He walks past the cafe she loved. He reads something about inner work, and her face flashes in his mind, not in grief, but in knowing. She tried to pull him toward his truth, and he resisted. Now he regrets that resistance. He thinks of all the walls he built to keep her out, and how she stayed for a time, gently knocking. But eventually, even the most loving woman will stop knocking when the silence on the other side becomes unbearable. She didn't ask him to be perfect. She only asked him to be real. And now he regrets that he thought being vulnerable meant being weak. He regrets not seeing that in her presence. Weakness could have been transformed into something sacred. This regret becomes the most intimate. Not because it's about losing Herb, because it's about losing himself. The version of him she believed in. The version she tried to water and tend and awaken. He begins to see that she didn't just leave, she rose. She rose from the space where she kept waiting for him to join her. And when he didn't, she chose to meet herself fully. Instead, that's the kind of woman a man never forgets. Not because of what she gave him, but because of what she made him confront within. And the greatest sorrow. He now knows she could have loved all of him, even the flawed and messy parts, if only he had let her in. But time, once lost, is merciless. And so, he carries this regret not like a wound, but like a lesson etched into his bones. There's a particular kind of silence that follows her departure. Not the silence of absence, but the silence of realization. It doesn't come immediately, not while he's still distracted, blaming, defending, or pretending he's fine. It comes slowly, curling into the corners of his day. It settles in when he's scrolling late at night after everyone else has gone to sleep. It breathes down his neck when he's surrounded by people but feels profoundly alone. This is the fifth. Regret, realizing too late that her silence speaks louder than anything he's ever heard. And in that silence, he finally begins to hear all the things she used to say, not just with her words, but with her presence, her patience, her pauses. She had been saying, I'm here. I'm with you. I see you. And now her absence is louder than his ego ever was. He used to think silence was a relief. He mistook her stillness for submission, her quiet for calm. But now he understands she wasn't silent because she lacked words. She was silent because she had already said them. Too many times. She had already explained, offered, adjusted. There comes a moment in every deep woman's life when her inner voice grows louder than her love for someone else. And when that happens, she doesn't slam the door. She just stops knocking. And that's what wrecks him now, not the argument. They never had, but the calm way she withdrew her energy. She didn't leave to punish him. She left to find herself again. And in that choice, she became louder than any scream. Jung would call this silence the voice of the self, the deepest layer of the psyche, where we confront our authentic nature without illusions. And that's what she had been inviting him to do all along, to meet himself. But now, as he sits with her absence, he begins to hear his own silence. The silence between the excuses, silence behind the pride. The moments where he could have touched her hand, but chose to scroll instead. The moments she cried softly beside him, and he stayed frozen. The times she asked if he was happy, and he deflected with a joke. He begins to remember these moments, not as isolated regrets, but as threads of a story he didn't know he was writing until it ended. A story about a man who couldn't hear what mattered most until it was gone. It would be easier if she had been cruel, erratic, or vindictive. But deep women rarely are. They walk away in wholeness, even when they're cracked inside. They carry their dignity like a cloak, and that's what unsettles him most. She left with grace. She didn't try to win. She didn't try to make him chase her. She simply chose herself in a world where she had once chosen him. And that elegance haunts him. It makes him question why he didn't fight harder, why he didn't change sooner, why he needed to lose something rare in order to value it at all. And the answer is simple and cruel, because he wasn't ready. But now her silence makes him ready. It makes him listen, not to her, but to the part of himself that stayed quiet for too long. That silence becomes the sacred teacher. It doesn't scream, it doesn't beg, simply waits like she once did. And in that waiting, he starts to change, not for her, not for the hope of getting her back, but because he realizes the man she saw in him, the one she believed he could become, still in there, buried beneath distraction, fear, and ego, but still breathing. And that becomes the paradox. Losing her gave him back to himself, but not without cost. He carries her memory like a scripture, her love like a mirror, and her silence like a compass. And though he may go on to love again, some part of him will always belong to the version of himself that only she knew how to reach. Eventually. Every man who lost a deep woman is confronted with a mirror he can't avoid. It doesn't hang on a wall. It appears in moments unexpected, piercing, and unforgiving. In the laughter of a stranger that doesn't echo like hers. In the warmth of another body that still feels cold because it lacks that intangible thing she carried. In his own voice, trying to explain the past without choking on it. This mirror doesn't show his face, shows the man he was with her, and the man he refused to become. And that is the sixth regret. Realizing too late that he never truly saw himself until she left hand now. He can't unsee what he lost or who he might have been. Before, he avoided his reflection by drowning in distraction work, screens, women, alcohol, even casual peace. Anything to escape that truth she once tried so softly to illuminate, that a deep woman doesn't just want your time, she wants your soul to show up. She wants you present, not in the room, but in the space between her thoughts. She wants the unspoken to feel safe. But now, when he finally looks at himself, he sees a man who showed up too late. A man who only offered what was easy, and called it love. A man who confused her emotional depth with drama because he didn't yet understand that intimacy is never convenient. And vulnerability is not weakness, is the currency of real connection. Jung spoke of the shadow as the unconscious, part of the psyche, the traits we disown, bury, or fear. She saw his shadow before he did. She didn't flinch from it. In fact, she loved him through it. But the tragedy is this: he thought her love would always stay, even if he never dared to bring light to those shadows. He thought she would keep carrying both their emotional weights. But deep women are not saviors. They are initiators. They are invitations to wholeness, not substitutes for it. And he begins to see that now. She wasn't too much. She was asking for all of him, and he gave her half. And when a deep woman feels your half-love long enough, she stops asking for more. She packs her soul and walks into a life that mirrors the depth she gave away too freely. And now, ironically, he becomes the man she always hoped he'd be, but not in time for her. He meditates, he listens, he pauses before reacting. He doesn't interrupt anymore. He remembers how her eyes used to dim a little when she realized he wasn't really hearing her. He reads books she used to quote. He journals, tracing back the moments he hardened instead of softened. And every evolution feels like both a rebirth and a requiem, a beautiful tragedy, because the one who inspired his becoming is no longer there to see it. That's the seventh regret: realizing that the woman who loved his potential never got to live beside his transformation. That her departure was the catalyst, but also the cost. And yet, in that ache, something sacred grows. A kind of reverence, not for her as an idol or fantasy, but for the version of love she brought into his life. The kind that required courage. The kind that didn't flatter his ego, but nurtured his soul. And though he may carry the grief of that lost connection, he also carries the blueprint of a deeper self. A man who finally learned that love isn't proved in grand gestures, but in small, consistent moments of presence. A man who now walks more slowly, listens more deeply, and lives with the echo of her voice not as a wound, but as a reminder. She may be gone, but the mirror she held still hangs before him. And now, every time he looks inward, he nods not in shame, but in thanks. Asterisk after time smooths the sharpest edges of her absence, something peculiar happens. The silence she left behind no longer screams. It whispers. Not with rage, not with sorrow, but with something far more difficult to carry. Clarity. The kind that doesn't arrive in one thunderous moment, but accumulates across sleepless nights, awkward dates, and emotional echoes. The man who once felt crowded by her complexity now feels the vastness of her absence. The eighth regret creeps in slowly, and it sounds like this: I never really knew how much she did, how much she held, how many fires she quietly put out, until she wasn't there to do it anymore. He begins to notice the way no one else reads his silences the way she did, the way no one else knows when to speak, when to touch, or when to let him fall apart without fixing it. Other women are kind, maybe even affectionate, but not attuned to the frequency she lived on. She didn't just hear his words, she heard the emotion he buried beneath them. She didn't just love his strengths, she respected the broken parts he tried to hide. And now he sees it. In hindsight, he wasn't alone with her. He was understood. And understanding, once tasted, ruins all shallow waters. That is the ninth regret. Realizing she wasn't just a woman, she was a sanctuary. And he only saw the door after it had closed. Life moves on, as it always does, but he carries her in. His choices, not out of obsession, but out of transformation. When he speaks now, he tries to mean every word. When he listens, he tries to actually hear. He's learned to slow down, to say, I don't know, to apologize without defensiveness. But still, there are moments when her memory surfaces not in longing but in stillness. A sunset, a poem, the way someone uses a phrase she used to say. These aren't haunting moments, they're holy ones. The quiet grace of someone who marked your life so deeply you can't separate her influence from your becoming. That's the 10th regret. Understanding that she wasn't asking for perfectionly presence and he gave her promises instead. By now, he no longer looks to get her back. That part of the story has faded into acceptance. She's likely moved on, maybe even found someone capable of meeting her where she is. And though he used to fear that image, her laughing in someone else's arms, it no longer burns. It humbles him, because he sees now what he couldn't see before. She deserved a soft landing, not a battlefield, not a guessing game, not a man who needed her to teach him how to feel. She deserved someone who arrived already willing, not someone who arrived only after she walked away. He mourns, not the relationship, but the version of himself that took too long to show up. And yet there's something redemptive in it all. Not in the fantasy of reunion, but in the fact that she changed him. Not with force, not with manipulation, but by simply being herself. A deep woman isn't a storm you survive, she's a season that rewrites your soul. And the final regret is perhaps the most sacred of all. Not that he lost her, but that he met her before he was ready. And now, every deep conversation, every quiet moment of honesty, every act of love that goes beyond the surface is a tribute to her. The one who left not to hurt him, but to return him to himself. Asterisk in the quiet aftermath of her absence. He doesn't fall apart like he once feared. No. What unfolds instead is stranger he becomes, more whole. Painful? Yes. Uneasy? Always. But wholeness is not comfort, it's confrontation. It's looking at the reflection she used to hold up and realizing he had been avoiding it all along. Her departure didn't destroy him. It awakened him. And that is the cruel grace of losing a deep woman. She doesn't just leave the room. She leaves a mirror behind. One that shows him exactly who he was when she loved him and who he refused to become. He stops blaming her. Stops painting her as too sensitive, too intense, too much. Because now he understands she wasn't asking for too much. She was asking for just enough: truth, intention, safety, presence. The things he thought he could delay, negotiate, postpone. But she didn't have time to teach a man how to see her. Deep women don't stay to be shaped. They arrive fully formed, hoping they'll be received, not redesigned. So, when she left, it wasn't a power move. It wasn't an ultimatum. It was a final act of love, a painful one, a courageous one. A choice to stop whispering in the dark, hoping he'd turn on the light. And now, long after her footsteps have faded, he lives differently. Not loudly, not dramatically, but mindfully. He speaks more slowly, touches more gently, listens without interrupting. Not for applause, not for redemption, but because she taught him what intimacy really is. Not grand gestures, not desperate apologies, but consistency. And that's the quiet truth he never saw coming. Her love was never gone. It's in his patience now, the way he holds space for others. In the apology he gives his mother without being prompted. In the way he sits with discomfort instead of fleeing. That's what she left behind. Not punishment, but blueprint. She won't know, of course. She may never hear the thoughts he rehearses on sleepless nights, or see how gently he speaks her name when no one else is around. But maybe that's not the point. Maybe this was the point all along. She wasn't meant to stay. She was meant to shake the dust off his soul. And in doing so, she gave him something most men never find: a deeper self. And though he wishes he'd learned all this with her still beside him, he now understands. Sometimes the lesson demands the loss. sometimes we don't grow because they stay. We grow because they don't. So when people ask him about her, he doesn't call her the one that got away. He calls her the one that woke me up. Not with shouting, not with storms, but with the steady heartbeat of a woman who refused to shrink just to be loved. A woman who didn't leave because she stopped caring. She left because she finally cared for herself. And in doing so, she became unforgettable. Not because she tried to be, but because she was never afraid to be everything she was. And now, even in her absence, he carries her forward. Not as a scar, but as a standard.